What is up, everybody? I am Raymond Summerlin. This is the Sharp Angles podcast. It is Thursday. Recording this on Thursday morning at 11:30 Eastern. That only means one thing. This is the fantasy preview episode with myself and the one, the only, the great, the Swami of Konami, the new Konami leader of Joshua Dobbs, Mr. Rich Hribar. How are you doing, Rich?
I'm doing good. 11 weeks in. Are you tired of me yet?
Buddy, I've never been. I am interested. Like, we should go back. We should go back and try to count down how many podcast episodes we've done together, because it is. I suspect it's a substantial number going back to various guest appearances, and then obviously in our Roto World days. I assume that number is relatively high. That might be a fun off season.
But you
What
never
what's
had at NBC, you never had to edit my work, and now you do. Has that changed your opinion on me at all?
No, what I will say, I did have to edit it a few times for when we used to do the magazine, and you are so much better a writer today than some of those magazines. Although I do think that the magazines, you probably weren't interested in that content, and I think you actually liked the work. Some of those tiers, by the end of some of those tiers, you used to write. I used to go, "Oh yeah, he's out on this." When you're writing about, I don't know, Mike Davis
Ted
or
Ginn or
whomever you're
whoever
writing
is
about.
right on. Well, what's funny is I go back to when I first got offered, a decade ago, when Denny reached out to me to write, and he was like, "Hey, would you be interested in writing for this football website?" And I was like, "Dude, I'm not a writer." And he's like, "You don't need to be." And I was like, "All right."
Yeah, but now you're awesome. Like, you're a really great writer now. I like it's so easy. It's so easy to edit your stuff. Now I didn't know I was just gonna big up you this entire time. You're
I
fishing for
baited you. I
compliments
set
here.
that trap.
Yeah, fishing for compliments
Yeah.
out here. While we're talking about how awesome we are, or at least one of us is, I guess we should plug that. Unfortunately, our free week is over. We talked about the free week last week. I hope you got into it. I hope you didn't miss out during the free week promotions, which was actually since the beginning of November. If you played your card rights, you could have gotten actually 2 free weeks out of that. During that free week promotion, our computer totals went 7-2. Our elevated plays went 13-5. Overall, we went 31-23. And if you go back to the season, if you just look at our betting packages overall, a $100 better on our standard unit size would be up $3,558 so far this year. We're having a really good year on the betting side. We're also having a really good year on the fantasy and DFS side. I think this past week, correct me if I'm wrong here, Rich, but you had a nice little DFS week on some of the stuff that we saw last week. All of that's part of the packages that are available, the NFL Plus package that's available over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. And you can actually get 60% off of that NFL Plus package using code TAKE60. You can also get 60% off if you're just interested in fantasy. You can get 60% off our fantasy package using code TAKE60. So, go and check that out. NFL Plus includes NFL side and total bets, NFL prop bets, and all of our fantasy content. So, a lot of stuff over there, sharpfootballanalysis.com. Make sure you check it out. All right, let's
And I
get
will
into
say,
this. Let's
I will
talk
say to
about.
piggyback off of that, this is the time of
Yep,
year where I'm usually at my best. Like,
yep.
we're in the final stretch. I've charted like December has always been my best DFS month, and this is typically because I'm a very objective, evidence based analyst, and we've got more data than, like, it's not just small sample size stuff. This is like the time, and I know it's like the worst timing for some people because, like, you're like, oh, I'm out of my season long league, or like I had a bad year. I'm kind of done at fantasy football, but if you are playing DFS or like you're doing player prop stuff or anything, like, you can get the worksheet for basically $45 the rest of the year. I'll get you your $45 back, I promise.
Yeah, I think that that's a really important thing about the worksheet. And this sounds like an infomercial,
Ah,
and I guess it sort of is, but I do actually mean this. The thing that I really find value in the worksheet are player props, and I love betting player props. Player props are one area in betting that you still have an advantage, that you can still actually make money, because there are so many lines to set that some of them are going to be soft, and those lines are not bet at the same level as sides and totals are, and so you don't really get the sharpening of the crowd that happens to those lines. And so there are a lot of opportunities in props. And if you just go through the worksheet, you can find literally, if you just went into the worksheet and it just like read the top bullets and then read like the basic bolded part of each player, you'd have a decent shot of understanding kind of what props you should approach. And so the worksheet is very useful for that. It's something that, now that I'm reading it again every week has really helped me. So thank you for Christmas, Rich. I really
So that's all I
appreciate it.
say, man. Listen, like, holidays are coming. We got to get some of that holiday cash back.
Yeah, it's we got to get some of that money. I can't remember what my sister told me she wanted the other day, but I looked at the price tag and I went, all right. Yes,
No, my wife
yes.
wanted like some pillow that was like at like $80. Like, it's just a pillow. Like, what are we doing? What are we doing?
I speaking of pillows, I get made fun of because of the way I say pillow. I don't know what I say wrong about it, but apparently I say pillow incorrectly. I'm not sure what I do. I think there's like I don't put a W at the end. I'm not sure, but my family has always made fun of me about pillow, and I'm like, saying it right. Y'all are the
It's
wrong.
a weird
Anyway,
word when you say it out loud, but like slow pillow.
it's
Roads.
a very odd word. It's a very
We're off to a
this
good
is
start
this
here.
is peak this is peak week 11 NFL talk that we're in right here. Peak week 11. All right, let's get
Excellent!
past it. We're gonna move on. We're gonna start talking about this actual week. And I guess the biggest news of this week, and actually the biggest thing happening over at Sharp Football Analysis right now, because Warren Sharp released an article about kind of the situation with the Bills under Sean McDermott and how we arrived here. So if you like to read that, it's a really great article over at sharpfootballanalysis.com for free, absolutely free. Go and check that out. But the Bills offense coming off of their disappointing loss against the Broncos, that was definitely the offense's fault and had nothing to do with the defense and special team errors at the end there. They ended up firing their offensive coordinator, Ken Dorsey. And what I'll say about this is it's kind of there are two sides to this. One, we have expressed on this podcast concerns about this offense already, the structure of this offense, the compact nature of this offense, kind of the predictability of it. We've talked about that on this podcast already. So we're not absolving Ken Dorsey of any blame here, obviously. But this offense was still, by any metric you look at, a top 5 offense. And so it's going to be interesting to see where this goes. Is Sean McDermott really going to get his wish now? Are we going to see a lot more running? What does this do for James Cook? What does this do for Latavius Murray? Are we going to get Leonard Fournette involved? Kind of what are your thoughts, going into this week following this big news?
Yeah, I mean, from a fantasy side, just because of the way this offense is operated, like it hasn't really mattered, like the ups and downs they've gone through, because we just know, hey, every week Stephon Diggs is going to get his targets. Now that Dawson Knox has been out, it's opened the opportunity for like Dalton Kincaid to be like at least as that minimum, like a volume-based tight end one, and he's been really good at its opportunities. And then the rest has just been like ancillary guys, because we know that James Cook is in this role where he just doesn't get any of those like, high cholesterol fantasy touches. And we saw it again last week. I mean, dude he was hyper efficient, 109 rushing yards and 12 carries. And what happened when they got inside the 5? He wasn't on the field. And we got our 10 PPR points. Like, thank you. But that's just where he lives. And like the Gabe Davis coaster, we know what we're getting. So like, it really is. We just keep focusing on Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs. And I don't really see like that element of it really changing. Especially when you look at their upcoming schedule. I mean, they face the Jets this weekend, the team that's given them a bunch of fits the past 2 years when they've played them. Then they play on the road at Philadelphia, which they've given up some opportunities, some wide receivers. But if Josh McDermott wants to run the ball against the Eagles, and this Eagles defense in particular, good luck. Then they come out of the bye and face the Chiefs and the Cowboys. Like, they just don't have like this. Like, they're not going to like absolutely boat race any of those teams. So like the fantasy run out's going to be probably, I think, pretty limited, where we're just really focusing every week on Stephon Diggs. We'll see what happens when Dawson Knox comes back, and if they revert to playing a lot more 12 personnel and it hurts Dalton Kincaid and he gets cannibalized by Dawson Knox. But it's kind of really nothing's going to change, I think, for how we're approaching, at least attacking this team from a fantasy lens.
I think you mentioned the schedule, and just kind of from a real football sense, that this team could end up missing the playoffs. Like, that is what we're looking at. The Bengals are in a very similar situation.
Yep.
Although their rest of schedule is not as difficult. But we are in this very odd place where the Bengals and Bills could miss the playoffs. And that would be, I mean, stuff like this happens in the NFL every year, but that in particular feels like not. If you had bet that before the season, what odds are you getting on that? That both teams aren't making the playoffs? Like wild, wild odds, plus 5,000, something wild, right? And so that is, it's a really interesting situation. What I find about this offense is I do think Sean McDermott, and I don't even think this, you could just listen to the man speak. Sean McDermott wants more quote unquote toughness, which is coach speak for run the football. And what I've found very interesting about defensive coaches, and this is just true of most defensive coaches, I won't say all, but most defensive coaches, is they insist upon doing the thing that they would be happy the other team did to them. And it's a very odd thing that we see over and over and over again. If you were a defensive coach going against the Bills and you were playing Josh Allen, you would want Josh Allen to turn around and hand the ball off to Latavius Murray on first down. So why would that be what you want your offense to do? It doesn't make any sense, but I kind of think that that's where we are. You mentioned the schedule doesn't set up very well for them to do that. Does that mean that they're not going to try to do it? Joe
Right.
Brady, hopefully future Penn State offensive coordinator Joe Brady, is he going to? Is he going to? You know, is he going to just kind of like have to kowtow to whatever McDermott wants? Like, is that why Dorsey was fired? I do have concerns about what we have moving forward. But Josh Allen's going to get a rushing touchdown every week. It doesn't matter. And if Stephon Diggs is going to get 35% of the targets, it doesn't matter. And so I think your overall point there is pretty good.
Yeah, I think
With
just from like a
Buffalo.
structure stance, like if you're looking for like any type of changes, like Joe Brady historically like has wanted to operate more like under center, and maybe that helps us do something like what we saw at the Bengals, right? When the Bengals were able to get more under center, it wasn't that like Joe Burrow under like turning his back to the defense is gonna like open things up, but like it allows you to do more diverse things offensively and not just be as one note. And we've seen like Josh Allen has like really dramatic splits this year with and without the use of play action. So maybe if they can get more under center and they're incorporating more of the play action, that's like an element to where like you could see like an efficiency boost. But that's really kind of like the only like objective path I see like from like changing the coordinator and like structurally, like what kind of differences are we going to see?
I know about his play action splits, but now that I'm thinking about it, and I'll tweet about this if we don't have the answer. Is there a difference in his target tree and his target rates when he drops back into play action? Does that allow more of the tertiary options to, I don't know, get open, or does it help them out? Do you now know off the top of your head? That just literally popped into my head when you mentioned the play action.
No, but I mean, obviously we have like pretty like, easy accessible, an avenue to that
I'll let
data
you.
that will only take a second to kind of find. So we can easily do that
I'll,
right now.
yeah,
And
I'll
blow
let
up.
you go
So
through it. I'll let you go through it. I'm going to mention we do have a couple of questions here in the chat that we're going to get to. One
I do
here
have
from
it
Domo.
already because I'm that good.
Oh, look at you. All right. Sorry, Domo. We'll be there in just a second. What do you got?
So with the use of play action this year, Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs leads the team with 29.8% of the team targets. His yards per route run go up to 3.9 yards per route run when he uses play action. But it does, the guy that gets the biggest boost is actually Gabe Davis. He's averaging 3.2 yards per route run with 24% of the team targets. And that would make sense because when you think about when you use play action, where you're trying to set up the types of targets, the intermediate to vertical levels, that would benefit a guy like Gabe Davis than some of the stuff that's got to come out hotter, right? Where Gabe Davis isn't
It
necessarily
also
getting
helps him.
open.
It also helps him get open. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's what I
It's
mean.
not.
Yeah, exactly. Where you're talking about where the wide receiver has to win in under 2 seconds because the ball's coming out. That's not Gabe's game.
That is exactly the player I had in mind when I asked that question, because I figured that that's what it would be, but I didn't just want to, say it without having any evidence. But that makes a lot of sense. So maybe that's something to think about this week if you're playing in DFS. I don't know, just something to consider if we see that. All right, we had a question here with Domo. He's offered Bijan Robinson and Diontae Johnson for David Montgomery and DeAndre Hopkins and half PPR. Currently 6-4 and worried that Gibbs will get even more touches. I mean, that's an absolute fair worry. I I don't know. Is he getting the best side of both of those with Bijan and Diontae? I know that Diontae Johnson's
Yeah.
attached to Pickett, but DeAndre Hopkins is now attached to Levis. And We have, last week wasn't great for Johnson. Seems like maybe he had an injury or something he picked up. I need to look more into that. But I don't know. I think he might be getting the better side of both of these. I think that I would
The
probably pick
Steelers
him.
also ran for 200 yards, which like I
Yeah.
don't think there's a lot of weeks they're going to do that, but it at least gives you a signal like if they're up, they're going to do it. And you talked about the AFC playoff picture, and here we are again. The Aaron Paul meme. They're the Steelers. Here they
Still keep
are.
getting away with this.
They just keep getting
Can't
away with
keep
it.
getting away with it. No, it's wild. Do you agree with me? Would you take the Bijan side of that?
I actually think he's getting the both end rest, the better players at both end at rest of the season.
No, that's what I agree. Yeah, I would take that.
And
All right, then we have another one
I
here.
feel bad for Hopkins. I actually think Hopkins is not like dusted. Like he's not in like this period like where he's like end of the career Larry Fitzgerald, right? Where like Larry was getting there like only on volume and like Hopkins looks the part. It's just the offense is bad. Will Levis is very volatile. So it's just really hard to bank on him being more than like a very like, cattywampus, like wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 guy.
I do think that Hopkins will have. I think you're going to have spike weeks with Hopkins,
Yes.
and maybe that's like if you're guaranteed a playoff spot and they get the Texans twice in the playoffs, and you're hoping that on one of those he's going to go off and win you a week. I think that is more likely with Hopkins than it is with Diontae Johnson, and so that's kind of the idea of which player scores the most points the rest of the season is not as important as it is
Yes.
understanding the structure of your team and what you need from that spot. And I think that that's a way to think about because Johnson and Hopkins are close to me, I would say. And so that's a way to think about that decision. All right, from Gabriel Thomas here. How much, if any, do you downgrade Jerome Ford with DTR at quarterback? Which actually brings us into something we wanted to talk about, which was the Browns' offense with DTR. Let's do Jerome Ford first. You kind of wrote about Jerome Ford and the the kind of reliance he has on long runs. You wrote about it again in the worksheet, and all of that is true. What I will say is he is coming off of his best game of the
Mm-hmm.
season. That was definitely his best game from a consistency standpoint. He had a season high 47.1% success rate. He had a season best 5.9% negative run rate. That was his lowest in a game this season. He had 2.18 yards before contact per rush. His season average is 1.12. And we've talked on this show before, specifically about Jerome Ford and the difference between Ford and Nick Chubb, how yards before contact is a shared stat between the offensive line and a running back, and a running back can play a large role in those differences. And we saw Chubb get a ton of yards before contact, and behind the same offensive line, Ford hasn't been. But we saw that last week. And so that was his best game of the season. Now they have DTR. DTR, we'll talk about him in a second, was a disaster in his first start. But of course, he might not have known he was starting until an hour and a half before the game. So we'll have to see where that goes. But they're probably going to have to lean into the run more. Was last week just like a mirage, or was last week, all right, maybe Jerome Ford is turning the corner and we're starting to see him be less of a big play back and more of like an actual consistent running back? Where do you stand on that?
His role in the offense still is going to, for fantasy, to produce fantasy points, is still going to be reliant on how efficient of a runner he is, because he's not getting any scoring opportunities, and that's been kind of consistent. Yeah, it's all been Kareem Hunt. I mean, Kareem Hunt obviously has a touchdown in 5 straight games. Over that span, he's played 10 snaps inside of the 5-yard line. Jerome Ford's played 0 snaps inside of the 5-yard line. Guess what's probably going to happen at DTR? They're probably going to be inside the 5-yard line fewer times. So he's still going to be he's still going to be relying on efficiency, and the team itself is probably going to have fewer scoring opportunities. So I think he does get downgraded. I mean, we have a lot of running backs like in this bucket. I mean, it's been a very nebulous running back season. I think we've really had one good running back all year in Christian McCaffrey, and like the rest is a lot of volatility. But that's kind of where we are with him. He's just in that kind of really volatile like back end RB2 bucket because he's got to get touchdowns or have long runs.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so many, like you said, there's so many running backs in that bucket. So I think that you're right that this hurts the Browns offense overall, so that hurts Jerome Ford. But if they score fewer points, does it really affect him as much as it's going to affect Kareem Hunt? And then there's at least hope that what we saw last week is sticky, at least a little bit sticky when we move forward. And this, against the Steelers team, you're not scared of the Steelers run defense. And so maybe we kind of see that moving forward. As for DTR, I mentioned how bad he was. He was 19 of 36 for 121 yards and 3 interceptions in his lone start against the Ravens. They're going to him for a reason. PJ Walker hasn't been good. He hasn't been awful. He hasn't been good. I assume this team is a Super Bowl roster outside of quarterback. The only way that they're going to reach that upside is if they get more from the quarterback that they're going to get from PJ Walker. I assume that's why they're at least going to see what DTR has. But I think the best question about this offense is how long is Dorian Thompson-Robinson actually the starter? Because if he's what we saw in week 4, I mean, it's going to be a week and maybe not even that. But he looks fine in the preseason, so maybe there's more upside for him. How are you kind of approaching this offense as a whole, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised they made the move, to be honest, because they did win 2 of the 3 games that Walker started, and like I figured
Are
that
you
was like the
are you
baseline.
Tucker?
What's
Tucker
that?
Tucker Bagley talks about on Sunday how much he loves PJ Walker. Temple
It's
legend
not that I love him,
PJ
it's just
Walker.
that they had won 2 games with him, right? So like
Oh yeah, I know
if
what you're
you're in
saying.
this position where you are at the Browns and you're just trying to hold on to the playoffs, right? Like this playoff hope, like you could potentially get there if you go 4-4, but if you go 4-4 the rest of the way out, like DTR puts you in a spot if you start him the rest of the season to maybe go like 2-6 or like 1-7, right? And maybe it offers more upside too. So at least they're finding out. So that'll be interesting to see if he continues to start. Like he was so bad when he was just like he faced like real pressure for the first time in his first start, which was always going to happen in the NFL. But he was 4 of 14 under pressure in the game against the Ravens, threw 3 interceptions under pressure, and took 4 sacks. We're not scared of the Pittsburgh defense per se because they are like a volatile defense, but like we know they're going to put pressure on DTR. So like, does he cave and does he have the big like negative plays? Because that was like the one thing that like PJ Walker was at least getting by with was like he was just keeping the game in like a meandering script. And if DTR can't do that and like the Browns don't have a chance, like how many weeks does he get to start?
I think that really is the key. But I think this is a positive move from the Browns because to your point, the safe move is to just keep starting PJ
Right.
Walker. The fact that they recognize that getting into the playoffs means nothing if you lose in the first round. It just
Tell
means
Mike
a worse
Tomlin
draft
that.
pick. I know. It just means a worse draft pick is all it means. That I like that they're taking the upside and that they're at least trying to see what they have in DTR. I actually think it's a very forward-thinking move from
Mm-hmm.
Cleveland. And so I was surprised as well, but I was happy to see it. Just one more note here on the Browns offense before we move on. Mari Cooper has 2.67 yards per route run with Watson this season, 1.72 without Watson on the field. He was 1 for 16 in DTR's first start. The Cooper coaster is going to be on full display the rest of the way, which is
Which is
certainly
a bummer because he was finally just getting to be reliable.
exactly. Now we're back. We're back on the roller coaster. What a time to be alive. A couple questions in here from Dylan Fink. Dylan, I don't want to get into like the specifics here, although I do think I would. I guess real quick, trade Andrews, Mixon, James Cook for Kelsey and Jacobs. I don't think I'd do that particularly because I don't really see the big benefit in having Jacobs over Mixon. So I wouldn't do that. Do you have any thoughts on that really quickly before we talk about his overarching point?
No, I mean it looks like a musical chairs type deal. Like, because you're
Yeah.
not really like it'd be like say you were trading Trey McBride to get the Kelsey, right? Like you're swapping the tight end 2 for the tight end
Exactly.
1, and you're swapping, Joe Mixon and Josh Jacobs, who are again very nebulous players. Uh, so it feels very musical chairs, unless yeah, because you're actually giving up the 2 running backs, which is giving you less bullets. So yeah, I'd probably hold off on that one.
But his overarching question and kind of the theory question, I think we talked about this last week, but it's a good thing to talk about every week, is it worth losing some of my depth to boost the starting lineup? In this particular trade that we just talked about, I don't think you're really boosting the starting lineup. And so that's why I wouldn't do it. But in general, and we mentioned this last week, absolutely yes, especially as we're getting here to the end of the bye weeks. If you have a playoff team, the only thing that matters in the playoffs is the starting lineup. And if you can trade 2 for 1 and improve that starting lineup, we're losing out on some of that depth that you can replace on the waiver wire. The waiver wire hasn't been great this year, but I mean, you could have gotten Ty Chandler this week, right? You can replace some of that on the waiver wire. Those 2 for 1 trades where you're getting the one and you're improving your starting lineup. That is the way you go about winning fantasy leagues because it doesn't matter how many points you have on your bench in the
Mm-hmm.
playoffs. Who cares? It's not winning you the week. The only thing that matters is first. If you ain't first, you're last. That is the way you should approach these things. And if you
And
get an
we're in
injury
the
and you lose, what's the difference between just losing in the playoffs? Like it's the same outcome. So you're taking on risk, sure, but you're also taking on the risk of just not being good enough to win, and that's the exact same outcome. So that's kind of the way I approach everything.
Yeah, that's 100% what you want to do. And it's easier to kind of force the issue on some of these trades now as we're approaching the trade deadlines because teams are going to know they need 1 or 2 wins to get in. And we still have a 6-team bye week after Thanksgiving and then 2 teams on bye in week 14. So you can kind of push and kind of maneuver. It's like, hey, you're going to be down this position, like you're going to need this win. I did that in a league I'm in where I had Kyler come back in a super flex league. And I had Russell Wilson, and I traded Russell Wilson and Devontae Smith to get Jamar Chase to just do a 2-for-1 and just kind of upgrade my starting lineup where I was starting Devontae Smith every week. We'll see if I regret that because his splits without Goddard were really good last year. But yeah, that's the type of example that we're talking about.
Yeah, that's funny that we are going to talk about his splits without Goddard here in just a second. So, but yeah, no, I do think it's a great example of. I always want to be the one. If I have a good team, and especially late in the season, I always want to be the one on a 2-for-1. That is just my general way that I approach life in fantasy football. So
you're trying to maximize your 1-week roster.
Yep, that's the only thing that matters. All right, so we actually have a few players coming back this week, or at least we think are coming back this week. I should preface it with that. We think are coming back this week that I think are interesting to discuss. The first is Justin Jefferson, who, I mean, they haven't confirmed anything, but last week at the beginning of the week, it was pretty clear he wasn't going to play. This week at the beginning of the week, it seemed like Kevin O'Connell was like, "Oh yeah, he's probably going to play." So
winning some games. That's what happens when you win some games.
The Vikings are making the playoffs. That is something that is going to happen. And so, so prepare yourself for that. But one of the things we've seen, and we actually mentioned this with the Josh Dobbs trade and his kind of propensity for targeting tight ends, that it could be really good news for TJ Hockenson, and it has been. Hockenson has been targeted on 38.2% of his routes. I got the stat there eventually, Rich. 38.2% of his routes with Dobbs. He has a 42.6% target share with Dobbs. Dobbs has a 34.2% tight end target share in his career. It's not surprising that TJ Hockenson was doing this without Justin Jefferson. I guess the question is, as we get back and Justin Jefferson is getting back into the lineup, are we going to continue to see Hockenson with these, not this high, obviously, but elevated target shares, where we can think about him more as like an upside tight end than just somebody you're playing because he's going to get enough targets to be a tight end one in kind of the landscape we live in?
Yeah, it's tough. I hate the hedge and probably say probably somewhere in the middle, though, because Justin Jefferson just is going to command targets. He's Justin Jefferson. And Kevin O'Connell's done such a good job of building. The reason they traded for Hockenson was to open up more for Justin Jefferson. If you remember at the front half of last year, Justin Jefferson was running nothing intermediate and nothing downfield. He had to occupy that role in the offense, and they needed to acquire a player that could take on that role. And Justin Jefferson blew up immediately when Hockenson joined the roster, and he could fulfill that role in this Kevin O'Connell offense. So Kevin O'Connell wants to design stuff for Justin Jefferson. Josh Dobbs also wants to throw to tight ends. Like, it didn't matter if it was Chikakonkwo, if it was Zach Ertz, if it was Trey McBride, or now TJ Hockenson. Like, the dude wants to throw to the tight end. So probably somewhere in the middle where he'll have a little higher target share than the beginning of the season, but obviously Justin Jefferson is going to cramp his target share that he's had the past 2 weeks. The guy probably hurts the most is Jordan Addison. Probably makes Jordan Addison a pretty volatile player, especially with no Kirk Cousins and with Josh Dobbs being a much more inaccurate quarterback. Although he's been fine with Kevin O'Connell. I do believe in Kevin O'Connell. He is one of the guys I believe in. So,
well, one coach he thinks matters.
Yeah, me and Ben Johnson and Kevin O'Connell, my guys.
I added in my notes too that I think the real person that loses out in this is Jordan Addison, who hasn't been commanding the targets you would expect him to command with Justin Jefferson out anyway. And now Justin Jefferson's coming back. I think that's a good call out. That's really the concern that we have here. Another guy coming back. I think this one's confirmed that Devin Achane is going, or Achane. What are we?
He wants to be Achane now.
now?
I will see.
Achane. All right. So he's almost certainly coming back. This is interesting from kind of two perspectives. It's both interesting from Achane's perspective, and it's interesting from Raheem Mostert. So when you look at this split, what are you expecting here in this back?
Yeah, we talked about it with Mostert going into the Germany game that, like, I think there was a huge tell. Like, I think there's a huge tell in the entirety of the season that they want him to basically be around like 50% like backfield share, like really no more if they can get away with it. They don't want to put too much on his plate given, his age and injury history. The only times he's gone above that are the games where they had no one else available, like when Salvin Ahmed went down and when Achane before Achane blew up. So I do think with Achane coming back, it's going to be that 50-50 backfield split. And it does make both of these guys kind of, efficiency dependent. But like if you're going to bet on efficiency backs, like it's going to be in this system and in this offense, because this is also a run game. Like they use their guy. Like Mike McDaniel has totally shown us through 2 years that he's going to use his players in the most effective manner. And we saw that with Achane when he was blowing up. We've seen it with Mostert, his usage. We've seen it Tyreek Hill. So like, I think if you're going to have like that type of player, even if there's some volatility here, like these guys still have upside. I mean, and the touchdown equity still is so good. I mean, Mostert's tracking to potentially flirt with the John Riggins record of most touchdowns ever for a 30-year-old running back. He's definitely at least in the conversation. We'll see if like it gets impacted the rest of the way out here, but both of those guys are probably going to be in like that upside, like RB1 type of range. But like there will be lean weeks. There'll be weeks where if you don't get the touchdown or the efficiency, you're like, oh crap, I got 45 yards out of Mostert, and like it was a shitty game. But like we've had a lot of running backs do that this year, so you just take the bitter with the sweet, because the sweet for these guys is really sweet.
Yeah, the sweet for these guys is 3 touchdowns, and so that is better than like that. Jerome Ford, who we talked about, you're not, probably not getting that from Jerome Ford in that offense with DTR, PJ Walker at the helm. And so, yeah, the upside here for these two guys is certainly higher. One more thing I wanted to mention here, maybe two more things before we move on to the biggest game of the week, is the Cowboys and what they've been doing recently from a passing perspective, and most importantly, what we saw last week in a game that they blew out the Giants. So I was off the Cowboys passing game last week. Thankfully, I was also off Tony Pollard, but I was off the Cowboys passing game last week because of what we saw early in the season when they were able to blow out teams and they just kind of, disappeared. But what we've seen recently is that they've been throwing so much, their drop back rate is so high, and the way that they're going to end up blowing out teams now is with Dak Prescott and with CeeDee Lamb scoring touchdowns and scoring points, that I think we've reached an interesting point here where I am now no longer concerned about Dallas blowing out teams and getting into the odd game scripts that they seem to be in every game, because I think that they figured out that this team, they need to pass, they need to throw, they need to get Brandon Cooks more involved like they have. Perhaps they need to continue to get Jalen Tolbert more involved, although I guess Gallup he got a touchdown last week, right? And so they need to throw. That is the team they need to be. And if that's the case, then even in blowouts, we're looking at Dak and CD and all of my Lions Cowboys best ball stacks, and we're looking at those as hoping that they're looking pretty good moving forward. Is that kind of how you're looking at it as well?
Yeah, and they showed us a couple weeks ago against the Rams that was the case too. And early in the season too, it's tough when you have that many defensive touchdowns, like for things that go weird, because obviously you lose an offensive possession too on the defensive touchdown, so you lose like the opportunity to have a high drop back rate and to throw more. But yeah, I mean, this is kind of what I thought like this team was structurally built to do in the offseason. And I held the bag on these 8th place Brandon Cooks best ball teams, and they finally got a good week out of him last week. Too late, but this is what I always thought was on par for this offense. They're meant to play with like kind of speed and space. And Dak is such a good processor. Everyone hates Dak, but he's so good. Unnecessarily doubted Dak Prescott.
Dak Prescott is like Dak Prescott is the spreadsheet king, but also good. So he's like,
it's not Garoppolo.
He's the actually good Garoppolo is exactly what I was going to say. He's the actually good Garoppolo, the spreadsheet king that is actually not bad. So
yeah, Dak, it's all timing based, right? It's like just like his worst moments seem to come at like the worst times, and then it just lets the narrative go. It's the Kirk Cousins has lived the same way. Like Dak and Kirk Cousins have lived on that spectrum for so long.
And last year with all the turnovers, even though he put the ball in danger more last year, but a lot of it was kind of what we're seeing with Josh Allen recently is that you just get a little unlucky sometimes
Yeah,
with
sometimes you get
turnover
lucky.
worthy plays. Exactly, it is what it is, and so a lot of that has happened throughout.
I mean, that you go
career.
back to the
I guess we
Eagles
do.
game. I mean, that Eagles game, like the Cowboys realistically had a good shot to win that game. Like they just like the game of inches were true that week.
Literally, it was 2 inches. Like it was the Ferguson touchdown and his foot going out of bounds. That's literally what we're talking about with them there. We don't need to talk about the 49ers game.
No,
But the Eagles game, there you go. You thought about just putting in the GTA meme. Oh shit, here we go again for Tony Pollard. I guess we need to talk about Tony Pollard. I mean, this matchup is perfect. Everything sets up perfectly for him, but I don't know, man. I don't know what to do with Tony Pollard anymore. This is what I
you should
know.
buy him. You
Whatever
should
Tony
trade for
Pollard
him.
did in the offseason, no other running back should ever do ever again. That is
Nah, you should
what I
trade
know
for
about
him. The narrative around this is so weird, and it's weird. No one wants to hear I'd say because I was high on Tony Pollard coming this season, but like the narrative around this is so weird because if I were to tell you, Ray, if you just blank slate this, and I come in and say, hey, Ray, I've got this running back that is an RB1 in expected points. He's supposed to he should have 8 touchdowns. He's got 2. Even the past 5 weeks, he's an RB1 in expected points. He's in one of the best offenses in the NFL that we're just so excited about. You would want to buy that player. You would say that's a screaming regression buy.
Absolutely.
But because the expectations and there's a letdown and we're not going to get what we originally thought we were going to get, it's anchoring and tethering to this. Like this is a complete anchor bias. Like Tony Pollard looks like such a clear buy. And I get nobody wants to do it because it's been a letdown. You're not going to get what the investment is. Trust me, I know. But he still is like he is all the peripherals objectively. You would say, I want to like this is a spot to attack. And if people are that sad about it, what does it hurt you to go in and buy now? You should do this. I mean, again, game of inches got tackled at the 1 yard line again last week. He could have had another touchdown, didn't get it. Eventually, those are going to flip because that's the way we play fantasy football from a process stance. What I think is interesting, though, is the overall running back discourse. Because the difference between Tony Pollard and Travis Etienne is just touchdowns like this year. Like they're the exact same player from a metric stance and like an efficiency rushing stance. It's that one player has touchdowns and one doesn't. Actually, from an expected point stance, Travis Etienne is lower than Tony Pollard. But it's just the way the running back position has played out this year. And it's the way it does play out in fantasy football sometimes. But outside of Christian McCaffrey, we've done this dance with like everyone. I mean, Josh Jacobs now is like a top 5 running back in fantasy football. Ask anyone if they've had Josh Jacobs all year, if they believe he's been a top 5 running back for them over the course of the season. We just have not had like these like Gibraltars. It's one guy. We hope Austin Eckler can get back there, but even he hasn't been back there. But yeah, I think the discourse is weird because it's typically anchored to like kind of what the offseason expectations were. But if I were to tell you that you have all those things lined up for you, you would say, yeah, that's a player I would like to acquire because the best is probably still ahead for him.
It's funny you mentioned Jacobs because we just talked about Jacobs and Mixon being essentially that player as well. There are just so many of those players. Kenneth Walker, the
Derrick
usage hasn't been the
Derrick
same
Henry's been in that
lately.
big thing.
Yep.
Like, I mean, we've got Breece Hall, same thing, right? But like, because the expectations were, and listen, I was part of that, and people will say like, oh, you're just it's copium. But like, yeah, because I expect that. You're not going to get that. But what I do care about is what points are going to be scored this week and moving forward. I still do care about those. And you would say like, this is a player that seems to have a signal that like, yeah, there is still positive progression here that could be had.
Or also it doesn't work out and maybe he
Yeah.
doesn't hit those because over small samples, that's the kind of thing that happens. I don't know how much soccer you watch, but Chelsea's expected goals for like 2 years in a row were so much higher than they actually scored.
And sometimes that happens, right? And then we'll write about it all off season. Like, because
exactly.
But you have another, like we have DeAndre Swift's in that boat too. Like there's all these guys where like once you get to like ranking guys at like RB5 and lower, I get to these guys and I'm just like, these, like, no one's really that good here. Like Saquon Barkley and Aaron Jones. We talk about Derrick Henry. Like no one's no one's screaming off the page. It's like, yes, I'm so excited to have this guy right now.
Just McCaffrey. That's it. That's the only one. We have to move on because I really want to spend some time on Chiefs Eagles and we're starting to run out of time. I do want to mention that Kyler Murray, it wasn't a great game for him from a passer, But what we saw from Kyler Murray last week as a runner and him looking healthy, looking exactly like Kyler Murray, he had 3 designed runs. It was actually the second most designed runs for a quarterback last week. He had the second most rushing fantasy points. He had the touchdown, and we'd like to see him get the goal line quarterback sneak. But we'll see how that develops moving forward. Everything I saw from Kyler Murray last week gave me a lot of confidence moving forward, and hopefully we see that passing part of it improve as well. All right, we have to get to Chiefs Eagles, the biggest game of the week, maybe the biggest game of the season so far. It's a massive game for both of these teams. And I think we need to start on Patrick Mahomes. We need to rekindle a conversation we had several weeks ago about how this offense has just kind of not been good. And you've mentioned it and you're 100% right that we've seen this from them before, that they've kind of meandered through the regular season and it hasn't been great. But now we're coming out of a bye. This is the biggest game here for them of the season so far. We need to see this offense do more, and if they don't in this spot, then I start to get more actually worried about what the ceiling is for this offense from a real football perspective, and then also just from like a season long fantasy perspective, a DFS perspective. I continue to be concerned about what we're going to get for this team. So, is your level of worry higher now, or are you kind of still in the same spot?
I mean, for fantasy, I'm still in the same spot because they only have one player we care about. Well, 2 if you count Mahomes, but like Travis Kelce is still the only guy we really care about, and like is what really changes for Travis Kelce. We would love maybe for one of these receivers to emerge, but like they're just not going to play any of these guys enough snaps. The only guy that's going to always play the most amount of snaps is Marcus Valdes-Scantling because structurally he tactically does what
running those sprints, baby.
You got to clear out. You got to clear it out for us, and they don't have another guy to do that outside of maybe Justin Watson. So like Rashee Rice,
Can we talk about how jealous we should be of Marcus Valdes-Scantling?
I'm super jealous.
He gets to make a ton of money to go to the gym. Like essentially, that is his job, is just to do cardio and make a ton of money. And I'm so jealous of him.
And I'm
so happy for his
win regularly.
Exactly. And don't get hit because all you're doing is just running down the field. He's got it.
Like he's not Jalen Guyton or like Alec Pierce, where it's like they're doing these things and you're just like, we lost. Or like we're 500. Like, are we even that good? Like the dude's living his best life right now.
He is the closer on a good baseball team.
And no one expects him to be good. The best thing.
Yeah.
Like anytime Marcus Valdes-Scantling scores a touchdown, it's like a huge bonus. And they're just like, yes. Like, what a life. What a life. But I mean, we would love Rashee Rice to be a thing, but like he's just not getting enough playing time. We'll see if maybe outside of the bye, like his route participation like really jumps. But like I still think they're going to rotate a lot of these guys in because that's like what they do. They're going to mix Kadarius Toney in. They're going to mix Sky Moore in. Like these guys aren't just going to go away. So it's like it's hard to see like anyone really standing out. The only other guy like you would say like you are like concerned about then would be like Pacheco, who turned into a guy that like we thought was going to be like a reliable RB2, maybe even flirt with being like a fringe RB1 at one point in the season. And as the samples fleshed out, we've just found out that like the Chiefs still are going to drop back and throw a lot. He's never going to have these games where he gets like 25 carries, no matter what the game script is. So like he has to get into the end zone to be viable for fantasy. Other than that, then he's just like basically like glorified Gus Edwards, right? Like in this offense. And that's kind of what he is. And you ain't going to run on the Eagles. So
that was the other part of it I was going to say is that this is just a terrible matchup for him. I mean, one player has scored more than 15 PPR points against the Eagles, one running back, and that was Breece Hall, and that's because they let him score a touchdown. They've given up 2 running back rushing touchdowns this season. They're third in yards allowed after contact per rush, so they're tackling players. They are preventing long runs, preventing chunk gains. This is a really tough matchup for him. What you would say is he is third on the team in targets in the last 5 games. But then if you dig deep into that and you're saying, okay, well, if this is a blowout or it's not a blowout, if this is a kind of a shootout, and we see them back and forth up the field, well, those catches have not been coming in those situations. He has been losing out to Jerick McKinnon in no huddle, in passing down situations. He's run 3 third down pass routes over the last 5 games, 3 no huddle pass routes. So if this game kind of goes off and maybe like becomes high scoring, that still doesn't really help him unless he ends up getting on the field on the 2-yard line to score a touchdown. And so
And these are the types
there's
of
not a
games where we do see the Chiefs start to use Jerick McKinnon a little bit more too.
absolutely. So I don't think this is a good setup for Isaiah Pacheco. I also don't know in what scenario you have enough players to bench him. Like what I'm in a
True.
14 team league where I picked up Ty Chandler and I also have like Jahan Dotson. And I could play Ty Chandler and Jahan Dotson over Pacheco. And that's something I will at least think about, but I probably won't even pull the trigger on that. And so that is it that's kind of where you are with running back at this point. And so like you continue to say about the Chiefs offense, what's the actual fantasy idea? I don't know. There are actionable DFS thoughts here, but it's just more of like thinking about from, like I guess a real quote unquote football
Yeah.
perspective, what we're seeing from this team.
I would expect them to not have like an incredible like offensive game here though, because like the way the Eagles have been vulnerable this year, like the Chiefs don't do. Like the Eagles have been vulnerable through wide receiver play and like throwing outside the numbers, and like that just really hasn't been the Chiefs' offense.
You're gonna get now that we've talked so much about MVS never catching passes, he's gonna catch like 6 for 170 yards and 2 touchdowns on this.
He'll be king of the world.
I
King of the world.
I wish you the best, MVS. I love you. You are. I'm so jealous of you and the life you get to lead. On the other side, the Eagles side, you mentioned it at the top with Devonta Smith. So I guess we should start there. That his splits last season without Dallas Goedert on the field. I know people are going to look for tight ends, and maybe we're going to get excited about Alberto. Alberto is going to come back from the fantasy graveyard,
I'm rooting
and
for him.
I hope so. I really do hope that that's true because I do really like Alberto, but I don't think that that's the case. You had a lot of good stats in the worksheet preview for this about how they just didn't target tight ends when Goddard was out last year. Those targets went to Devonta Smith. And so we've seen Smith, he had a good game before the bye, but we've seen Smith not really, with A.J. Brown going wild, not be the fantasy asset we kind of expected him to be. It seems like for as long as Goddard is out, we might actually be getting that from Smith moving forward.
I don't. Yeah, I think it'll be a condensed target tree. They do have some better guys. At least like Alberto, you can at least make the case he's better than like Jack Stoll from like an upside stance like last year when they just like we're not going to throw to these guys because
What's
they
the other
just
one?
didn't offer.
Grant
Yeah.
Paltakera, is that his name? Is that the
Yeah.
other one?
Yeah. So like maybe there's an opportunity here. I mean, Alberto, he's just giving us flashes. So maybe there's something. Hey, Howie did trade for him, so maybe there's something here. But we'll reserve hope. Like I said, I'm not going to play him. Maybe you single game DFS him, right? Like you get cute. That's where because you guys are all
I will
monsters in
promise you
Showdown.
this. I haven't looked at the Showdown pricing yet. If Alberto is $200 on the Showdown pricing, which I have to assume he is, he will be in my lineup. So I just want you to know that. That
Yeah,
is
you guys are
something
all
that is
monsters.
going
All
to
you
be.
Showdown monsters are like just ghouls. You play all those guys. But yeah, I
So,
imagine it's going to be
well,
tight though. With between obviously AJ Brown's on this huge tear, he still is getting targets. So we've seen Devontae Smith like the last 2 games before the bye. He got in the box, and now with Goddard being gone, and his target shares was under 30%, just under 30% with Goddard off the field. So let's say it doesn't even go that high because maybe Alberto has a couple targets or Julio Jones has a couple targets over what Quez Watkins got last year. Like even shaving a 29.8% target share down to like 26% is still like a big upgrade of what we were getting on Devontae Smith.
first of all, this is Olamide Zacchaeus erasure, and I won't stand for it. The second thing is, yeah, no, that's the point. He's going to get more opportunities, and we have a pretty good idea that Devonta Smith is a good wide receiver.
Yes.
A good wide receiver from Jalen Hurts getting more opportunities. It's pretty.
And their run
pretty
game low key
straightforward
sucks.
situation.
Like one thing that's different with this Eagles team and last is like they kind of suck at running the ball.
Yeah. Which is odd because I still think their offensive line is good.
Yes.
And so it's this year has been one of the odder offensive years that I'm not going to say I don't want to fall into that trap of recency of saying this has been like the oddest offensive year, but it's been very odd from an offensive perspective. Teams just not being able to do, these two teams in particular, not being able to do the things that you would expect them to be able to do with the talent they have on hand. It's just been an odd year. Let's finish up here with AJ Brown. You had some interesting stats in there that I think I'd like you to talk about because I think it's a very fascinating situation that Kansas City has been very good against wide receiver ones. going back to last year as well, even when their defense maybe wasn't as good as it is now over the second half of last season, their corners are good and they've been good against wide receivers. But they also play a lot of man coverage, which AJ Brown absolutely destroys. And I don't think I'm going out on a limb and saying that even though those cornerbacks are good, AJ Brown is the best player in that situation. And so it's a really interesting situation here for Brown. Obviously, in redraft you're playing him, but if I'm thinking about from like a single game DFS, if you're looking at and you see that red number next to his name on DraftKings, does that maybe bump him down a little bit? Are we going to get fewer captain spots from him? It's just an interesting thing to think about. Is this a situation we should be attacking that maybe other people aren't going to be based on just the overall numbers against the Chiefs defense?
Yeah, that'd be more of like if you know like projected ownership, like that'd be more if you would factor in like if he's going to be under-owned, like you said, as a captain or under-owned, that's when you would maybe use it as like a pivot spot. But I don't know that off the top of my head, like what he's actually tracking to be. That's more of Adam's wheelhouse. But I mean, we've seen the Chiefs have faced Tyreek Hill and only allowed 62 yards to him. They faced Justin Jefferson early in the year, and he left that game with a hamstring, but he left that game in the like late, and he only had 3 catches for 28 yards.
It's a final drive, right?
Yeah, so like there is like a nice sampler, but I would say this: they were on this tear last year too, and when going into the Super Bowl, and they got there. I would equate it more to like the Cowboys matchup, to where like he can still get there just because the volume, the opportunity. We know where the ball's going to go in this offense. But will it be are you going to get AJ Brown back on like starting a new streak of 125 plus yards? I would probably bet against that. But from a volume-based touchdown equity upside angle, like there still is absolute upside for him in that sense.
We're not laddering AJ Brown this week, is what you're telling me?
I mean, probably not. I mean, I would expect this game and not to end up like the Super Bowl did. I would love for it to end up like the Super Bowl did. It was a fantastic game, and I would love for this game to shoot like that. But I think it'd be more like the Cowboys game if you're looking for like a shootout type of game where it's like a mid-20s type of shootout.
I think that makes sense. I think that's
if that makes sense. I mean, both of these teams deserve a lot of credit, and like we follow like in the Eagles defense, like I know it's taken a step back and they've played better quarterbacks, but like they're not like a terrible unit. It's not like a terrible defense. Like they make timely plays. They still have good players. And like I said, the way to attack them is not structurally what the Chiefs do. So I'm really curious to see what this version of the Chiefs does to generate points, because the way they've generated points typically is not what's worked against the Eagles this year. Except for we're not going to have Nakobe Dean. So like Travis Kelce's been in like a mini Kelce slide just based on his standards. So like, is this a big Kelce spot out of the bye?
MVS for captain. That's what Rich is saying, folks. Lock MVS into the captain spot in the showdown lineups and call it good. We don't have time to talk about Seahawks Rams. I do want to mention that I kind of think what we saw from Geno in the second half last week was a bit of smoke and mirrors. I mean, if you look at what happens, 75% of his yards in the second half were yards after catch. His average is 47.4%, which is right about the NFL average. He had success in the second half against the defense he should have had success against for the entire game last week. And that looks like a little bit of smoke and mirrors. So I'm not going to get too terribly excited about Geno Smith's passing game turning the corner, but I'm very happy. Let me be very clear about this because of how much Geno Smith I rostered in best ball. I'm very happy to be wrong about that. So go and prove me wrong this week against the Rams. All right, we have to do Uncut Gems here. Moving on to Uncut Gems, my favorite segment, your favorite segment. Who do you have this week?
I have Ty Chandler. It's a layup, but I saw you didn't put him on there, so I figured we might as well take it. I mean, I think Ty Chandler, he was an interesting prospect for me anyways, because he was a guy that he caught the football a lot in college, and he tested out well athletically. He averaged 6.6 yards per touch for his career, over 6 yards per carry. And he averaged 14.4 yards per reception his final season in North Carolina. He ran a 4.38 40 at 204 pounds. So I like all of those things. And like he was a guy that was efficient in both preseasons and just never got an opportunity. Didn't really do a ton with his opportunity against one of the better run defenses in the league. But now, as much as this Denver defense has improved, they've still shown like they will give up explosives in the run game. And we saw that last week against the Bills. They're 31st in explosive run rate allowed, 31st in yards allowed on explosive run rate. So if there's a chance for some of that athleticism to come into play here with Alexander Mattison in the concussion protocol, this message will self-destruct if he clears concussion protocol. there's an opportunity here for him to get 15 touches against the team that's allowing a ton of explosives. I think he's interesting guy. You talk about. I think I would play him over Pacheco. I think I would play him over James Conner if I had James Conner.
That's interesting.
Not Devin Singletary. I'm trying to think of some guys I have like in that like nebulous range. I would play him over Najee Harris, Jerome Ford, like those guys. Like if you got him in those spots.
Number 2 on the depth chart, Najee Harris apparently is what we've learned as a charter member and a thought leader in the free Ty Chandler movement. That I'm 100% in on Ty Chandler. I might have spent way too many fab dollars on him. What I will say about this,
and you should have got him a week ago. I know Curtis highlighted him a week ago after the injury to Cam Akers. And Curtis does a great job because he's, this is how you win high stakes. Like Curtis is always proactive on these things. You got to be ahead. When a guy gets to be the number 2 in the depth chart, that means he's only one play away from being number 1 now. So you got to get these guys before it's too late. And now everyone's just a week too late on Ty Chandler, and you may be out of fab. You maybe have to empty what you have left on him, and you may not just get him.
No, actually, in the deeper leagues, I did go and get Ty Chandler last week, which I was very excited about that working out. Not that Madison got hurt. We never root for injuries. But what I will say about that is that even before Madison was hurt, Ty Chandler was working into that game. He had his touchdown before Madison suffered the injury. So even if Madison comes back this week, this is all moot, right? But we need to watch the usage because Madison has just been bad, as we expected him to be.
There's a reason they traded for Cam Akers. Like it just has never the constant tell of this NFL season as it's progressed has been that the Vikings don't really believe Alexander Madison is like a bell cow.
No, it's 100% they don't. Why it's taken this long to try out Ty Chandler, I don't know. That also is not promising for him, but they did. They gave him a shot last week. He didn't do great, but it was a tough matchup. He's probably going to get a full shot this week, and we might just walk out of this week where even when Madison comes back, Chandler is the 1A, which that could be an outcome that we see. My uncut gem here is Michael Wilson, who didn't have a great game last week. He was just an inch away from having a touchdown, and maybe we're thinking a little bit differently about him this week. He ran a route on 91.7% of the dropbacks last week. He had a 19.4% target share, which was season high. Actually had more targets than Marquise Brown. I don't expect that to continue, but that is kind of what we saw from him. The Texans defense has begun to absolutely worked by receivers. This game has the highest total on the board. I think Kyler Murray should become better and more comfortable as a passer as we move forward. I think this could be Wilson is running enough routes and getting enough targets, and is the type of receiver that can create big plays and score touchdowns, that in a spike week environment, he can deliver those. And this is kind of a spike week environment. And so I'm interested in Wilson, both in DFS and if you're in deeper leagues and need some help. All right, that's about it for us. Anything you're looking at? Anything really fascinating to you heading in here to week 11?
No, it pretty much covers the basis. Yeah, I mean, you look at that Cardinals game, Michael Wilson got tackled on the 1 yard line. I actually think they called it a touchdown at first, and then they
was a
overturned
touchdown.
And
it
then,
was a touchdown. I stand by it.
And Kyler missed Hollywood on a layup touchdown. If those two plays are in the box score as touchdowns to those receivers, the expectations and maybe excitement for those players, especially around a DFS stance, probably looks a lot different than it does like currently on Wednesday afterwards.
I believe I'm giving away here that I will be stacking Kyler Murray in DFS this week. I believe I'm giving that away. I am, there's so much going on this week. What does the Bills offense look like? What does Kansas City's offense look like? Can the Steelers keep up this incomprehensible season
They will
against a team that they incomprehensibly beat in week 2? Like, what are we looking at this week? It's going to be a really fun week. We actually, unfortunately, will not be back to talk about it next week because next week is Thanksgiving. We record this normally on Thursdays, and next week I'll be smoking a turkey. So I will not be here to talk about it. However, we have a very exciting episode next week on Tuesday evening with Ryan and Todd and Adam talking about the DFS slate, Thanksgiving DFS slate. So you want to make sure you check out that. Check out Ryan and Todd tonight. Check out our Sunday recap show with myself, Tucker, and Curtis. All of that's on this podcast network. Make sure you check that out. Go over to YouTube, check out what we have over there. Sharp Football Analysis. Use Take 60 to get 60% off NFL Plus. So much there for you. Go and check all that out. And we'll be back to talk with you in 2 weeks. Look forward to it.